June 30th, 2014. Dinner tonight is going great. Good food, good friends, good conversation. Then the Ynet update comes in and our phones start buzzing. The 3 missing boys have been declared dead. Moments later, fireworks are sounding in the not-so-distant area. Yes, those may be Arabs celebrating. My heart sinks. I'm overcome with deep sadness. Our conversation nearly stops. We have nothing else to say. I've never been in Israel during such heavy times. July 3rd. I wake up to the unthinkable news of the death of Muhammad Abu Khadir. This is just sickening. How could people treat other human beings so horribly? How could Jews treat others so horribly? July 8th. They've announced an escalation and named the operation Protective Edge. I go to work at HUC today. I still feel safe. This doesn't look like how I pictured war. July 9th. At dinner tonight, Udi, the Israeli intern I work at HUC with, calls to tell me that rockets have been fired at Tel Aviv. Jerusalem is next, he says. Stay close to shelters tonight. I take a taxi to the Hartman Institute for a lecture by Rabbi Pinkin. We're only a few steps from Hartman when I stop, turn to my roommate, and calmly state, "That's the siren." We run as fast as we can back to Hartman. "Downstairs," Danielle Hartman instructed. So there we are, standing there in the bomb shelter with nearly 50 others. Some familiar faces, some not. Students, rabbis from the States, and Rabbi Pinkin. And it's silent. No one is speaking a word. Just tears, hugging. A deep sense of fear has overtaken the room. I'm scared. Not for my safety. I'm scared because rockets are being fired at Jerusalem. I'm scared because the situation is getting worse. How long will this last? July 11th. Another siren. This time I'm at home, alone. I take my computer and my phone and walk into the safe room, patiently awaiting the booms. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's good, I think to myself. 2 booms in a row are good. It means that the Iron Dome has worked. Have I really become accustomed to sirens? Is this the new norm for Israel? July 22nd. FAA ban on flights to Tel Aviv. My parents want me to come home. I want to stay. I still feel safe. Or do I? Maybe my parents are right. Is it time to leave? August 2nd. I wake up to go to Tel Aviv and a ceasefire is announced. By the time I finished brushing my teeth, Hamas has already broken it. I head to Tel Aviv anyway. Mid-afternoon, while I'm standing at the top of Nachalat Binyamin during the craft fair, a middle-aged Israeli woman comes up and asks, "Are you Americans?" "Yes," we reply. "Thank you for being here. It means a lot to us." People are thanking me for coming to Israel? August 4th. I'm at the Shuk for the afternoon doing some shopping. I get in a cab and my phone rings. Did you hear what happened? I hadn't. I was less than 2.5 miles from where a Palestinian driving a tractor had rammed into a bus, injuring 6 and killing 1. I hang up the phone and before thinking, I say, "Ma kara b'Yerushalayim." The Arab taxi driver replies, "Shamat, your friend just told you." For the next 10 minutes, we sit in an awkward, uncomfortable silence. Finally, the cabbie speaks. "You know, most of us want peace. Most of us don't want to be fighting and don't want to be in war." "Yes, I know," I reply. "The problem," he says, "is that the people in power, they want something else." We pull up to my apartment. "Yom Tov," the driver says as I get out. "Na'im ma'od, Yom Tov." Every day I wondered why I stayed. Was it personal? Had I become ideological without even realizing it? Would leaving early be the same as giving up hope? And what hope would I be losing? Hope for peace? Hope for a sustainable future for Israel? Perhaps on an individual level, It is much easier to give up hope, to accept that conflict is the reality of our people and the state of Israel, rather than to continue to yearn for peace. While I was there, I could feel hope dwindling. Even with the current ceasefire, the hope for a real end to this conflict seems distant and fragile. Despair seems a more natural feeling, that there will never be complete peace between Israel and her neighbors, that everyone will always hate the Jews, that Israelis must live in a constant state of uncertainty, and that the occupation will never end. Despair feels realistic. At times, having faith, feeling hope, feels naive. Certainly, the very leaders of the state of Israel seem to lean toward despair rather than speaking of hope. We hear only the language of protecting our people, protecting what we have or had, language that suggests Israel's greatest achievements are already behind her. Instead of speaking of hopes and dreams and aspirations, Israel's leaders have turned to ramping up the rhetoric. So many Israelis and non-Israeli Jews have felt helpless. Some feel hopeless. And worse, some have turned to violent statements that lead to sentiments like, let's kill them all. But our tradition demands that we must not give up hope, and our story, the story of Klal Yisrael, demonstrates just that. If the Jewish people did not come to an end in 586 BCE or in 70 CE, in 1492 and 1945, how can we give up hope today? We must not, we cannot give up hope. Our tradition calls upon us, obligates us, to seek peace and pursue it. It's important to note that our tradition does not teach to seek peace and achieve it. Perhaps this is because the achievement of peace may be out of our control. Nonetheless, we are reminded that we must hold on to that spirit and constantly renew our efforts to bring the potential peace we want. In an op-ed in early August, Danielle Hartman wrote, quote, "I don't know what is possible today or tomorrow between Israel and the Palestinian people, whether peace and security are attainable. I do know that the status quo never served our long-term interests," end quote. It's an instructive point. All too often, both Americans and Israelis lapse into the notion that whatever is happening now is always how it will be. But accepting the status quo, as Hartman suggests, is not the solution. The status quo bogs us down in survival narratives and serves only to define our people from one war to the next. What can we do here in the States when everything in Israel is not okay? How can we show our support to the people of Israel? Perhaps what we can give to our Israeli brothers and sisters is an unyielding hopefulness that is much easier for us to sustain given our distance from the constant threat of attack. We who live with the security from the viciousness of Hamas and Hezbollah must commit to never losing hope for peace, never giving up on peace. Our optimism has to keep Israeli despair at bay. Our hope has to fuel the never-ending quest to seek peace and pursue it. Because here's what we must remember. Israelis have no choice. They are confronted on a daily basis by the struggles of living in the Jewish state. Living with those dangers for even a month or two caused me tremendous discomfort. They are forced to continue to find ways to go on living their lives, finding ways to cope with their current reality. In this week's Haftarah reading from Isaiah, Adonai calls out, "Though the mountains may depart and the hills be removed, my love shall never depart from you, and my covenant of peace shall not be removed." Indeed, there is hope in trusting that God will not depart, hope in trusting that the covenant of peace shall not be removed. A covenant of peace requires the pursuit of peace by all parties. We have a role in pursuing peace too. Even when it seems as though Israelis have given up on hope, or when the Israeli government makes choices that display an abandonment of hope, and even when the situation seems hopeless to us here in America, diaspora Jews must keep our eyes fixed on the hope for peace. Regardless of our own political views about the country of Israel, its founding and its government, our tradition reminds us, Kol Yisrael Aravim Zeh B'Zeh. All of Israel is responsible for one another. The entire people of Israel, all of the Jewish people, are bonded together. This is not a statement of choice, but rather a statement of fact, a reality. We must turn our hearts to Israel and show our support, politics aside. Why? Vayikra Rabbah teaches, "Great is shalom, peace, because about all of the mitzvot in the Torah it is written, if you happen upon, if it should occur, if you see," which implies that if the opportunity to do the mitzvah comes upon you, then you must do it. And if not, you are not bound to do it. But in the case of peace, it is written, "Seek peace and pursue it. Seek it in the place where you are, and pursue after it in another place." The mitzvah to seek peace must be proactive. Even in a place where it seems as though the opportunity has not arisen, we are nonetheless called upon to seek peace wherever we are. We must resist the voices that say peace is unattainable or that peace is not possible. As difficult as it was for me to stay in Israel against the wishes of my family and very close friends, I stayed. I stayed as long as I did because to me leaving meant giving up hope. I stayed because I felt a sense of bondedness, a sense of unity to the people of Israel. I stayed because I believe that we as Jews and Jewish professionals must not remain complacent, must not accept the status quo. I stayed because if I want my questions of Israeli policies to matter to Israelis, I know I can't ask them exclusively from the safety of the sidelines. I have to have skin in the game, skin and heart and soul. I have to care and hope, even when I am tempted to give up caring and hoping. We cannot let terrorism defeat the people of Israel, nor the state of Israel. And yet we must continue to seek peace even on those days where peace seems merely impossible, even on those days when negotiating with Hamas seems like a lost cause, even when ceasefires are instated and broken moments later. As we move forward, let us be mindful of the rhetoric and language we use when speaking about Israel, to our students, our congregants, our teachers, and our peers. While criticism, even if it's given with love and emotional investment instead of judgment, can still be offered by someone who shows support, the important message is that we must stay in the game. Are we merely accepting the status quo and getting bogged down in survivalism? Or are we looking ahead towards the future, as the former president of Israel, Shimon Peres, recently stated? Pessimism is a waste of time. I prefer to dream. Perhaps the words of Israel's national anthem articulate the very hope we must latch onto. Based on a verse from Ezekiel, Hatikva teaches, "In the Jewish heart, a Jewish spirit still sings, and the eyes look east toward Zion. Od lo avda tikvatenu." Our hope is not lost. Our hope of 2,000 years to be a free nation in our land, in the land of Zion and Jerusalem.